Kids and Dating Part 2, Dan. We're going to be talking about 3 more questions today on Life Talks. I'm Ben, you're Dan, and we are 2 of the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship here in Cornelius, North Carolina. Dan, how are you doing?
After that last podcast that I hope you have gone back and listened to, I am just so excited about this episode.
We covered
of Ben and Dan work out their family issues.
We were all over the place last episode, but it was fun. I enjoyed that conversation. You got to understand that Dan used to date a girl named Trudy, and
you used to date one named Tiffany.
Not that means anything.
Trudy's a pastor's wife. What is Tiffany?
I have no idea.
Just the name makes me sound like she's probably in a strip joint or
stop
something.
It. Oh gosh. I mean, she was not a believer, I will say that. I went to a public school, so all right, so
I went to a Christian school.
Well, I'm not sure if that helps finding a mate, to be honest with you. All right, so we're going to try to get through 3 questions today, Dan. 3 questions.
Good luck.
All right. First question is this, and this is an important one because the technology has changed things.
Oh, big time.
So when a boy likes a girl and a girl likes a boy, the communication style is not just, I mean, when I was in high school, you would pick up the phone and you would
I can top
call.
This. Let me just stick this in here. When I was dating, I could not have a girl call me. I could only call her. That was considered forward and inappropriate at my house.
If a girl called
a boy? Girl called me, if my dad or mom had answered the phone, it was a girl asking to talk, they would have said, Dan does not receive calls from young ladies.
Really?
That's what they would have said. So here's how I worked out with my friends. If I knew a girl wanted to call me, she would let it ring half a ring, and I would know it was her, then I'd call her back. That was acceptable. Legalism is a wonderful thing.
All right, but you know, it used to be, the rule in my house was you could talk to a girl, but you got to be somewhere in an open public space.
Yeah, so did your mom get one of those 20-foot long
yes.
cords?
Yes. We had a 25-foot long cord
so you could take
in
it
our
down
home.
The hall into the bedroom?
So I mean, if I wanted to talk to my girlfriend, it was like in the living room, you know? And when you have siblings, that's...
We have one of those brick with the big long antennas coming out of it.
But that to me, it's actually wise to have communication that's public, because when communication is private, it can descend into inappropriateness.
Yeah,
correct?
and we've been making a lot of jokes, but the reality is, kids are sending nudes to each other via SMS, text messages, and so forth.
Snapchat.
At 12 and 13 years of age. I mean, it's actually a felony what they're doing.
Yeah.
And these pictures last forever and they pass around. I used to be a school principal. And the last time I was an interim for a year. This is 2010, 29.
Oh, and it's probably 10 times worse now.
1,000 times worse than it was. But even then I had to deal with junior high boys getting nudes, sending them to all their friends.
And I think that we're living in a culture, even as much as you think, well, I'm homeschooling and like your kids will push the boundaries and they will try to find a way to communicate to the way their generation communicates.
And they can communicate on video games, on Snapchat.
Oh, that's right.
And I mean,
through apps.
Yes. Yeah. So parents, you're going to have to educate yourself on all the different strategies.
You're going to have to.
I
think one of the things that we did in our home, and again, my kids thought we were Amish. If one of our children wanted to text someone from the opposite sex, before the age, I can't remember what age we made them stop doing this, but they had to add either my wife or I into the conversation,
into the group chat.
It was a conversation between the 3 of us, and so therefore they knew. Now I can't remember if this is before 14.
So Tiffany, what did you read in your Bible this morning?
So, but by the age, but then what we did was if they wanted to communicate, I can't remember, it was like 14 or 15. Then we said, okay, you can communicate one-on-one, but we're getting your text messages. And so we just set up so that we could receive their text messages, so we could see what was being texted back and forth. We didn't allow them to have social media or any of the other.
And that would be through what age? Because none of this technology was available when I had teenagers. So
I can't remember what age it was. I mean, until you allow them to have social media. And once they have social media, I mean, it's kind of like you can pray and hope and wish, but there's very little oversight. I mean, you can try your best, but there's so many there's so many back rooms and back corners and whatever that they can get
There are
around.
back doors that you can go through that most parents are not even aware exist.
And so, if you can limit their phone to just simply being text message, that's great. But even as I say that, most kids would be shocked. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you would ever. And this is where this is the saying that parents, I would encourage you to memorize this. Just because it's normal for you does not mean it's normal. Okay? Because there are things that are normal for their generation that should not be normal. Okay? So normal is relative. And you have to remind them there are certain things that feel or seem normal that are not necessarily good for them. And so it's okay to be the parent who has the Amish standards. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to draw a line and with the communication, because to me, this is where a lot of kids are getting into trouble is they have a intimate connection over technology, and it just speeds up the frontal lobe is not developed,
right,
and the hormones are raging, and so you just got to be super vigilant on.
But this
on
is
the
where
boundaries.
I want to jump in again with something we discussed last time, which is don't set policies in a vacuum of principle. And this is where, again, we need to go, why are you going to set standards for your kids? The kids need to hear that. They won't appreciate it, won't agree with it or like it. But at least they should know there's a reason behind it other than mom and dad are just mean old people.
Yeah.
And part of it also goes back to we have to prepare our kids for the world that they live in, not the world we wish they lived in.
Right.
So with that in mind, also, you need to teach your kids what do you do when you get a nude? Because
it's going to happen.
I'm a 60-year-old pastor, and I've gotten them a time or two from some random Russian off the internet that all of a sudden they say, hey, can you want to chat? Can we trade pictures? I get these messages like, block, 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 block. And I always show my wife.
Yeah.
But the reason I do that is because I know what they're up to. Your kids won't know what they're up to if you don't talk to them about it. And they'll feel pressured. Everybody else is doing it.
Yeah.
So why can't I?
That's right.
There are things that are normalized, activities that are normalized today. Certain types of sexual activity before intercourse have been normalized as a part of the ritual of dating that are as normalized for this generation as kissing and holding hands were for our generation. Yes. And if you're not having these conversations well in advance of those temptations, they're not going to know how to respond when they get approached.
That's right. So, I mean, a lot of this is preparing your kids for this and letting them understand. I think a lot, if you're going to have boundaries, which you should have boundaries, make sure you're strong on communication. Why you're having these boundaries.
And you're going to need a relationship for that communication to have any hope at all.
Well, and the other thing I would say is this. It would be really smart if your kids wants to start, liking or going out or dating another person, get to know the parents of this other child or teenager. And if you can, try to get on the same page with them, because what I have found is that there's a lot of parents that have various standards for their kids, and it's very frustrating to me. All right, this is vent time with Ben Rudolph. It frustrated me to no end that we sent our kids, we homeschooled and we sent our kids to Christian school for most of their education. And it would frustrate me to no end that here's all these Christian kids that have zero standards, zero accountability. And I was always the one to say, nope, we're not doing that. Nope, we're not. And to me, it was so frustrating that these parents never had any standards with their kids. And so, if you're listening to this and you're a parent and you're afraid to disappoint your kids, or you're afraid of what your kids are going to think, you got to get over that. You've got to say, God has given me a responsibility to protect and prepare my child for the future when they leave this home. And at some point, if you're just going to take your hands off the wheel and be like, oh, I just hope it turns out all right, like you're fooling yourself, you're lying to yourself, and you're actually doing harm to your child. And so what I would say is you have to have an intentional plan and purpose for what you're going to do with. That's why we're having this conversation.
Right.
But please, parents, do something to have some kind of level of standard with your kids and how they're going to communicate with the opposite sex.
These are milestones. These are road markers. And if
all right, I'm done venting.
If we don't establish them for the kids, then everything goes.
Yeah.
And being overwhelmed by the culture and feeling pressured and intimidated and even manipulated by what other people are doing is no excuse for not doing what God has called us to do. My parents used to say, "I don't care what they do in so and so's house, but in this house, this is what we're going to do." And again, you're like, well, that just sounds rigid and so forth. No, actually, what it did is it provided some security. It provided some.
Yeah.
It provided some boundaries.
And one of the things my kids are gonna, they probably got so sick and tired of me saying this, but one of the things I would always say is, I know your 16-year-old self really hates my guts right now, but your 30-year-old self is gonna thank me.
Yes.
And I think that's what, keep casting the vision of why you're doing this, because when you're at 30, I want you to stand before your husband or your wife and have no shame, no regrets, or at least as little shame and regrets as you possibly can have, because you and I both know that the more baggage you bring into the marriage of shame and regrets, the more complicated you're going to make your current marriage. And there's a lot of couples that you and I have spoken to over the years of the decades we've been in ministry, that because of the choices they made when they were young, they come into marriage with a lot of hurts, a lot of wounds, a lot of shame, and it affects the intimacy of their current spouse for decades. And that's what we're trying to protect young people from.
And that's one of the reasons why the dating culture right now is so dangerous, because you get a girlfriend, you get a boyfriend, and you spend a few months, and then you break up, and then you find a new one, and you spend a few months, and you break up. And that pattern of, as soon as it gets hard, as soon as it gets uncomfortable, whatever, I break up.
I don't feel anything anymore.
Yeah, continues into marriage, and so then you've been married for a year, then you break up, and then you've been married for 3 years, and then you break up.
Yeah.
And then one of these episodes we're going to talk about the impact of letting your kids get involved physically, as in sexually, but not even intercourse, even in the steps before. Those things fundamentally change how you engage with each other. And one of the things that people need to learn to do, all of us have needed to learn, is how to engage and interact with a member of the opposite gender where sex is not on the table.
100%.
And if we don't learn to do that, then we sexualize all of our cross-gender relationships potentially, and we lose the community and the family atmosphere that should exist in other parts of culture.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so we got through one question. We got 8 minutes left, Dan.
Good luck.
All right, so the second question is, what do you allow your teenager to do when they're dating? So over to each other's houses, go out and grill. I mean, you talked about having a room last episode with all the kids in it. Like, I am a firm believer that young people, before they should not go out one-on-one. Even I would tell my daughter, and I would tell my sons this: do not single date. Go on at least the first couple dates with a double date, because for a number of reasons. Number one, especially my daughter, you don't know who this guy is, right? And so watch him and see if how he acts and behaves.
I think a double date with mom and dad is
double date.
I know the kids just die at that, but I honestly don't think it's a bad idea.
No, have a game night at your home and have everyone
come over for dinner, make popcorn,
watch a movie together. But I think hanging out with each other's families is always a good idea. Going out in groups is a good idea. I would never send my kids, like if my kids want to go to the movies with their boyfriend or girlfriend by themselves, I never allowed that. I never allowed them to, if they were going to go out, at least when they were in high school, I never let them go out by themselves with the person they were dating. There always had to be someone else in the car. They had to be doing, some kind of group activity.
The biggest insult for me was my mom would sometimes make my sister go.
Oh, that's always.
And she was in the back seat with her head over the front seat. It was awful.
And I know, again, my kids mocked us like, we're so Amish, but I'm like, I just know what can happen when teenagers are alone. And my whole thing is they're like, I'm not going to do anything, Dad. I'm not going to do anything. I'm like, I know you're not going to do anything because there's going to be someone, you know what I mean? Like,
so this is kind of interesting because again, the parental mentality has changed so much. When you were in high school, where did most kids lose their virginity?
In the car.
In the car. The same with me.
Yeah.
Backseat of a car. There's a big joke about it. Where do kids lose their virginity today?
In their bedroom.
In their bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reality is as parents have become more lenient, we have facilitated activities that in the long run are for their destruction, and we've thrown up our hands like, well, what are we going to do? And here's what parents say to me. I literally had
What are
parents
you
say this
gonna
to me.
do?
They say this: I'd rather them be at home doing what's wrong than away from me doing what's wrong when I don't know whether they're being safe or all this other stuff. So
Oh,
why don't you just
man.
put a bowl of condoms out and a couple of adult videos in their bedroom? I mean, if you're going to just capitulate at that level, or you might be able to say, honey, I love you so much that I'm going to do some things that'll make you just really, really challenge me for a while. But in the long run, as you said, 30-year-old you
Yeah.
will love me.
And it doesn't mean that your kids they might do things behind your back. And there's things that just because you have standards doesn't mean they're always gonna obey. But I think you're gonna stand before God and you're gonna stand before them and say, I did everything I could to make sure I did my part in preparing you for a life that was honoring and pleasing to God.
Yeah.
And
And then you set the standard by which they know what the speed limit was. They know where the dangerous
Yeah.
curves were.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to add one more. Do you allow public displays of affection in the home?
Just between me and my wife.
I mean, and this is kind of a practical question, but like if Megan or Nathan was dating someone, did you allow them to hold hands with their boyfriend or girlfriend while you're watching a family movie?
It varied from child to child, quite frankly, and quite frankly, sadly, I mean, this is not something I recommend. My older kids were held to stricter standards than my younger kids were, and I don't know whether it's because I got older or busier or what it was.
Mhm.
I would simply say this: what they'll do in front of you,
They're going to
is
do times
10 when they're not with you.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think there needs to be a principle of caution about overfamiliarity in areas that lead to intimacy.
Yeah.
That's why I don't think it's good for 12-year-olds to tell each other they love them.
No.
They're
They don't even understand what love
and this is the
is.
way I feel about it with sexuality and teenagers and so forth is, life is a journey. And when there have been a couple of times when I was doing the laundry, which I should never be allowed to do, but I would take my.
You're not saying this as a sexist statement, right? You're
That's totally sexist.
Oh gosh.
No, I would throw some clothes in the laundry, but
Yeah.
I'd be in a hurry.
Yeah.
I waited too long. And so I wouldn't use all the cycles. Or on occasion, back when they had the dials and not the buttons, I'd move it through the cycle.
Oh my.
And you know what
goodness.
happened when I would take the clothes out? Either they would be like soaking wet because they hadn't spun out enough,
Yep.
or on one occasion, I remember I had used powdered soap and there was powdered soap everywhere. And what do? I'm an idiot. I dump it into the dryer
Oh,
thinking that it'll
no.
dry. It was just a whole dumpster fire by the time I got done. But what was wrong? I rushed the cycles and I
Yeah.
didn't let them get complete.
Yeah.
In a dating relationship and in adolescence, there are cycles, there are steps, and they take time.
Mm.
And when we rush those, so
Mhm.
when a 12-year-old is petting, which is an old school term for
Yeah.
putting their hands where bathing suits are,
Mhm.
okay? Or whenever they're French kissing at 13,
Mm.
or whenever they're laying in each other's arms watching a movie on your couch,
Mhm.
in an intimate embrace when they're 15.
Yeah.
We're rushing the cycle.
That's
There's
right.
a time for those things, but it's not when they're way too young to be getting married, and they need to be able to see marriage on the horizon
right.
before they start taking those steps.
Yes.
Now, I grew up in a culture, again, where it was like, don't even kiss them until you get married. Your first kiss ought to be at the wedding altar. I think that was a little dangerous as
Yeah.
well, because literally you had a situation where you signed a piece of paper, said I do, and you went from 0 to 120 in 30
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
That was not.
It's probably not healthy.
No, it wasn't. But on the other side, if the marriage ceremony was supposed to be about taking that last step into permanency and into intimacy. So
I mean, one of the things I always told my kids is never do anything. I mean, obviously, a standard of holiness is what they understood, the standard of holiness and sexual purity. But the other thing I would say is, listen, don't do anything with this person that you're dating that if you ever bump into them with your future spouse, that you're not going to feel awkward.
Right.
You're not going to feel a sense of like, oh gosh, like I'm going to have to explain some things. Like you want to be able. I have a really good friend. that I served in ministry with, and he dated this one girl all through high school, and they broke up when they went to college. They both went to the same Christian college, and his old girlfriend married another guy. Well, these two guys end up becoming really good friends, and it was really interesting how they were such good friends, and the reason why they could be such good friends is because my friend treated his girlfriend in high school with the utmost respect and purity.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's no awkwardness. There's no like, I know I've been intimate with this
Right.
woman the way you are. I mean, there's no awkwardness. There's no shame. There's no regret. And I'm like, I look at that and I say, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up because that's such a great principle. And I don't say this illustration because I want you to think highly of me because I'm honorary on every level, and you know that. But my wife and I both grew up that way.
Mm-hmm.
So now married for 38 years, almost 39, there have been times when I went out to dinner with one of her old boyfriends,
Mm-hmm.
and she's been out to dinner with one of my old girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
One of my old girlfriends is my sister's best friend. We see her every time we go to town or go back to my hometown. My wife really thinks she's a special, and we do that with zero awkwardness.
That's
and
right.
The reason we can is because we didn't rush the cycles.
That's right.
We knew we weren't for each other before we became intimate.
That's right.
And there is a freedom in that.
100%. And there's joy. And so, all right, I've got a couple more things to say, and then our time is up.
Our time is already up.
It already is up. I have to say this. Parents, have the standard. If you're going to have a boy or girl over to your house that your child likes, make sure your son or daughter knows the standard. In our standard, it was, one of my big standards was stay vertical. If I see you going horizontal while you're watching the movie, I'm going to point it out, and and they, every once in a while, one of them would start leaning in. They start tilting at a 45-degree angle. I'm like, get up,
feet on the floor.
And so, but communicate those standards up front. Don't be afraid to call out when you see them pushing the boundaries. And the other thing I would say is this: if your son or daughter is liking someone and that other person is invading into your family and they keep pushing your son or daughter to push the boundaries, that's worth having a conversation about. So anyways.
And I would add just simply this: part of parenting, and you got to be parents, but part of parenting is helping your kid get to the point where they set their values and they have a plan of action for
100%.
keeping their values, because there will be time when you're not there to enforce it.
Yeah.
And if it's only you enforcing it, it's never going to work.
And I'm so glad you said that, because if they don't have those same standards by the time they leave your home, there's really nothing you can do.
Nothing.
So except pray your socks
And
off.
hang on.
Yes. All right. We got 3 questions done. We got 1 more to go, and I'm excited about this one. And this one, just a tease for this next one is, what do you do if your son or daughter is dating someone that you do not like? That's a big one.
Show them your guns.
Next time on Life Talks, we'll deal with that question. Thanks again for joining us for this episode. We'll talk to you next time.